for questions, but our goal for tonight, as you can see on our first slide here, is to get cooking with what's happening at the $1 billion bake sale. We have so many ridiculous baking puns with this campaign. It's very fun. So next Thursday, January 30th, we are doing an advocacy day down in Olympia. Hopefully you know. Oh, Christopher, welcome from Spokane. That's awesome. We're really excited to have some people from Spokane or the east side here. So welcome. Again, this this evening is being recorded, so we can share it with people who can't be here. So if you need to turn off your camera or anything, just be aware of that. So I'm going to go over just the logistics of our advocacy day, and then Sarah's going to follow up with helping or with understanding how to be an effective advocate. So we're going to do some quick introductions, what to expect on January 30th. You can follow along here. The day's agenda, our rally, legislator meetings, collaborating with other people in your legislative district. And then, like I said, Sarah's going to present on how to be an effective advocate. We'll answer some questions. And then we're going to have some time to kind of practice sharing our personal why or our story that we want to share with our legislators. So yeah, we could probably move on to the next slide. So we wanted to take a moment to, again, to thank our sponsors. And these are some of our sponsors that have been helping us organize this advocacy day. We have the Washington Education Association, Washington's Paramount Duty, OSD for All, which is Olympia School District for All Together for Seattle Schools, Fund SPS. We also have on here a few other organizations. I think we have Fuse Washington, which is going to be helping us on our our advocacy day. So yeah, this has been a really cool statewide collaboration with anybody who cares about education funding. So we are hoping that our goal of this day is to tell our legislators to fully fund public schools. And we are trying to say that this $1 billion bake sale is a catchy way of getting the attention of the general public, but also media at large, and then our legislators to really understand that this is their paramount duty. Their number one job in Olympia is to fully fund public schools. So yeah, and again, another goal of our evening tonight is to hopefully answer any questions that you have about the $1 billion bake sale, to get any of our personal nervousness out of the way, and to get us all prepared for a fun day together of connection, of collaboration, and some fun advocacy down in Olympia. So my name is Megan Fisher. I'm a parent in West Seattle. So this is our welcome, Christy from Bainbridge Island. Sorry, I'm just popping around here. So this is a rough outline. This is our outline of our day. So our advocacy day is going to be taking place at 2 different locations. So at 8 o'clock in the morning in Olympia at St. John's Episcopal Church, we are going to be open for registration, where we are going to do a welcome and overview meeting with our legislative district, get organized on where your meetings with your legislators are, and understand kind of how that's going to work for the day. And then we're going to, at 9:45, we're going to march up to the Tivoli Fountain, which is about a 10-minute walk from the church, just right up the street, where we're going to have a big rally from 10 to 11 with a bunch of keynote speakers, students, legislators, educators. It's going to be a very fun and lively experience. And then from 11 to 3, it's going to be kind of a self-guided time where the church space will be open if you want to go back there. But also during that time, our hope is that you will have some meetings with your legislators and you'll be able to go to the building where they work, meet with them in their office, share with them some of our legislative priorities, and get to connect with them personally. And then at 3 o'clock, the church closes and we will go home. So really, there's kind of two different parts of this. So Sarah, you can go to the next slide. So if you are participating in the entire day, which we highly recommend, we want you to plan to get to St. John's Episcopal Church in Olympia at 8 o'clock to park, check in, get your information for where you're going for your meetings with your legislators. And there's parking available at St. John's. They have a parking lot, and then they also have street parking near there. At that church, we will have some baked goods for our $1 billion bake sale. We'll have coffee, tea, water. Please bring a reusable coffee mug and a water bottle if you are able to do that. And then our program at the church is going to start right at 8:30. We will have a lot to cover, and there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. Kids, hot chocolate for the kids, and a lot of things going on. So we're hoping, it is pretty early, but we're hoping that we can all rally to get there, to get cooking, get baking during the day. I should have had my puns more available. If you are just joining us for the rally from 10 to 11, which is also a wonderful choice, we want you to arrive at the Capitol grounds at the Tivoli Fountain area by 9:30 so you can find parking and check in and make it to the fountain by 10. So those are the two different timings of being there. Would be try to get to the church by 8 o'clock, and then or get to the fountain by 10 o'clock at the latest, 9:30. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So I want to go through this timeline again. So you will be coming into this church, registering, getting information on when your legislator meetings are happening. And legislator meetings happen based on where you live, which is out of your legislative district. So you will be headed in, you'll be able to get some coffee, baked goods. It's a warm and welcoming environment. There's also going to be a station there to make posters, and we will send these slides. Yep, and this recording will also be up on our website. There will be a space in the church available to make signs for the rally. If you want to make a sign like Fund Our Schools. We also want to encourage you to make a sign before you come down so you can have your own unique sign for our rally. But we will have a space for that. There's also going to be a kind of a calm down, quiet space for children or anybody who might need any accommodations for something if it's a little too chaotic being in the church sanctuary with other people listening to the speakers at the church. So we're going to meet. We will all check in at the church sanctuary at 8:30 and go through what to expect during the day. And then we will transition to meeting in our individual legislative districts where we will check in about where we're going for those meetings. Then at 9:45, we will all gather outside of the church with maybe a baked good if you want, and our signs, and we will march down to the Tivoli Fountain on the Capitol grounds to then join our rally from 10 to 11. So regardless, rain, snow, shine, freezing cold, we will be outside for probably like an hour and a half. So plan for the weather. If it's raining, the Tivoli fountain can get pretty muddy, so please be prepared with rain gear. We are proud Washingtonians who can rally outside in the weather is we will have some space at the rally where there will be some tents and some places to sit for people that might need disability accommodations, but there's not going to be a whole lot of that space. So we just want to make sure people are prepared for that. And then following our rally, there will be time for you to explore the Capitol campus, make it to your legislator meetings, and again, go back to the church if you need to do that. Yeah, so I am going to move to the next slide.
Can I jump in really quick?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so also when you come to the church, we're going to have everything printed and ready for you. So you do not need to print anything ahead of time. We're going to have packets for you. We're going to have agendas. We'll have name tags. So, we might send you information ahead of time before next Thursday, but don't feel like you have to find a place to print it. We will take care of that.
Yes, thanks, Alex. Yeah, anything else, please feel free to jump in. And then so from 10 to 11 at the fountain, again, fun rally. There's going to be a lot of media there. There is metered parking available on the north and south diagonals if you are not joining us at the church before 10 a.m. So, and that's pretty true of all of Olympia when you go down there. If it's hard for you to find parking where you are, I know there's some construction down on the Capitol campus, and it kind of makes parking a little bit tricky. So if you go just around side streets, you can pretty much find metered parking the further streets you go. You just might have to walk a little bit longer. So we just want to make sure people are aware of that. And then we have a really exciting lineup of speakers. We have Superintendent of Public Instruction Chris Reichdahl will be speaking, as well as a bunch of other legislators, students, educators, parents. The president of the WEA is speaking. And yeah, I think it'll be a really encouraging time. The rally will begin at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m., so please don't be late. And then after the rally, like I said, you'll have a chance to, yes, please wear red. Thank you for asking that question. Wear red for Ed, if you can. I'm wearing our Fund Our Schools shirt. Yeah, Alex, did you want to answer that?
I wanted to answer some questions we've been getting in the chat just out loud about legislator meetings. Is now an okay time just on scheduling stuff? Great. So
yes, we just also we're going to get to that, but yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. When you meet with your legislative districts, so we'll be in a church sanctuary, and then we'll be moving to a different space where we'll have signs on every table that have your legislative district. We took your home address. So when you get your name tag, your name is going to be on it, and your legislative district is on it. So we are prepping you. So if you don't know your district, don't worry, we will tell you. And then when it's time to move into your meetings, you can just find your table. So there aren't point people yet, and it ranges. There are some LDs where we have like 30 people coming, and some where there's just a few. So some of the small districts, if there are just a few of you, we may be sitting you together at a table so you can chat and kind of practice your talking points together.
Yeah, which Sarah is going to go over that a little bit later. So this is a really great map of the Capitol campus. So for reference, we didn't put the church on here, but we could have. So Capitol Way all the way down on the right side. I don't know if you want to move your cursor, Sarah, but the church is just south on Capitol Way, just a couple blocks. So we'll just be walking right up on Capitol Way where we get to the Tivoli fountain. That's the point A on there. And then point B on there is the Capitol building, the legislative building, which is, you can see it from afar. And point C on there is the J-Lob building, which is the House office building. And then directly across from that is the Cherbourg building, the Senate office building, which is, and they're pretty close to each other. And so that would be those meetings, the B, C, and D locations will be where your meetings are with your legislators. And again, that information will be communicated to you in the packets upon registration, but we're also going to be emailing that information out to you probably on Tuesday before the event next Tuesday. Once we finalize legislator meetings, you should get that information so you have it beforehand. We are also going to be selling some shirts down there. So if anybody, and what I usually do, I've saw in the chat, is I like to just wear my big puffy coat and then I put my red t-shirt over my puffy coat. So trying to stay warm but also wear red. And yeah, whatever you can do. We are also going to have some fun public schools stickers and buttons that we'll be passing out. So hopefully we have like a good presence with that. We are expecting about like around 500 or more people to be present at the rally at the fountain. So that includes hundreds of students that are coming on field trips. So there's going to be actual buses dropping students off at the fountain, which is going to be really amazing and also a little bit chaotic. So you want to plan for that, and possibly if you don't want to wear red, like Sarah said in the chat, maybe wear some school gear for your local school. We can move on to the next slide. So meetings with legislators. Most meetings will be scheduled with your legislators or their aides between 11 and 3. It's important to be at that scheduled meeting 15 minutes prior to that meeting time, to allow time to find the right building and get through the security. So how it works is when we were looking at that map and you have the C and D locations. So you walk up there, you go in the bottom of the building, you have to find the stairs, find the elevator, get to the 3rd or 4th floor, wherever they are, and then check in with security and let them know you have a meeting with Representative so-and-so. And then you wait, and then they walk you back through a door, and then you're going down long hallways. And like this third bullet point says, it will be a busy day at the Capitol with lots of other groups participating in advocacy days. So it gets really busy really quickly. So if you're bringing children to this event, it's just something you want to be talking through and just being aware of, having some energy and giving yourself enough time that you're not rushed for that. We'll go to one more slide and then I'm going to take some logistics questions before I pass it off to Sarah. So like I said, at the church portion in the morning, we are going to have some time for you to meet with other people in your legislative district. So again, that's based on where you live. So we'll group you off. You'll be able to see your sign. So like I'm in West Seattle, I'm in the 34th legislative district. I'll see 34. I'll walk to that table and we will talk through how we're going to approach those legislator meetings, who's going to go, what time we're going to meet where. And then if you are in a district that's larger with a lot of different constituents, it will be important to decide who's going to speak about what, because not everybody's going to get a chance to talk. And so we can have we'll have a list of our legislative priorities that we'll be handing to you that you can read through or give to your legislator. And yep, Becky, we will be deciding that the day of, because it'll kind of depend on who's there and who's going to show and who's going to go. And so yeah, the $1 billion bake sale campaign is working hard to see if legislators can accommodate larger groups. But again, like we said, the space is pretty limited. So if there is a really, and Kelsey, that's a great question, how long meetings will be. They will be probably 15 minutes. maybe 30, but most likely 15. So they're pretty quick. So we want to get in, and you kind of want to get in, be succinct, and get out. So Sarah is going to go through a lot more details on how to have a successful legislator meeting, but I want to pause and ask if there's any questions about the logistics of this day, where to go, how this is working. Is this explanatory? What questions do you have? You can either unmute yourself and ask, you can raise your hand, or you can just put your question in the chat. Christina, thank you for that comment. Yeah, Jessica.
Hi. First, thank you all for organizing this. It is a beast. I volunteered for some like setup shifts there at the church. So will there be additional information coming out about that?
Yeah, so we will be emailing all of the volunteers with more information. There will also be a volunteer person you can check in with the day of. I will be the volunteer coordinator the day of that you can check in with, but at the church. But I think we're planning on sending an email before with some volunteer information. That being said, we would love more volunteers. Even if you want to just bring a dozen cookies you pick up at the store, or bake something. But if you are able to volunteer for some of the volunteer needs are pretty easy. So if you're already going to be there, if you want to check out our Sign Up Genius, that would be helpful for the campaign. Thank you for volunteering, Jessica. And also, if you just show up and you don't really know your volunteer stuff and you want to just check in when you get there, you can come and find myself, Alex, Kevin, Sarah, or any volunteer. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, great question, Rebecca. Rebecca just asked in the chat, is it a good look to attend a meeting with young kids to make a point, or better to just attend for the rally portion since the kids won't be participating in the legislative discussion? That is such a good question. Legislators love having children come to these meetings. They roll out the red carpet when kids come to these meetings. It is like a bargaining ticket that works really well. So I actually recommend bringing your children if you think you are up for it and your kids are up for it. I brought my my now 7-year-old, but my 6-year-old last year to the Washington State PTA legislative. And it got a little bit long for her having 3 meetings. But she loved it. I mean, it was great. She did a great job. They weren't too disruptive, and it was actually like, yeah, it was a really great point to say, hey, we are literally here in your office taking work off and school off to tell you how important this is. I mean, that makes a huge statement to them. So we are also, as part of this, I forgot to mention, Alex, can I mention the cookies? Is that? Okay.
No.
Okay. We're hoping in an ideal world that we can have a cookie that's prepackaged and wrapped with a sticker on it that we can hand to our legislator. But it's highly recommended to bring your children with you to these legislator meetings. Again, they're quick, and it's awesome for kids to be able to share with their legislators what this is like for them, what their hope is. And if your kids don't want to go, that's also really okay. It's kind of fun for the kids to get to see how these things work, but like, yeah. So
I also want to just jump in. We, like Megan said, we are working really hard to try and get these meetings set up. You know, this is kind of how it works. We choose an advocacy day, you get people registered, and then they don't start session. So they didn't start setting up their calendars until last week. So some of the legislators may not be available at all. So, that's why we'll try and send out the schedule on Tuesday. We're trying to find a way to connect with their legislative assistant if the legislator themselves is not available. So that could also sway your decision on whether or not you bring your kids or which kind of aspect of the day you want to spend your time in.
Not as well. Yes, I brought my kids down my 3-year-old and my 7-year-old last week to the Wealth Tax Wednesday, where we wore red and met at the Sundial. And that was super awesome. If anybody wants to find out more about that, the Fund Our Schools Coalition is doing Wealth Tax Wednesdays. And bringing my kids to that was super fun and they loved it. And it was a really great experience to meet with some legislators impromptu. So highly recommend that during the legislative session as well. Yeah, any other questions on logistics? I will say before I wrap up I am so thankful for everyone for being here tonight, taking your time to listen to this, and then for coming down on Thursday. This is a big ask, and it is so important. We are thinking at the $1 Billion Bake Sale that this is kind of like a once in a decade opportunity, especially with what's happening federally right now, for Washington State to really step up and make some big changes for public education. We already know, we've heard from legislators that our collective organizing has already been really effective. So thank you. And I think Thursday is going to be a really fun and exciting and effective way to advocate. So thank you all seriously for being here. And with that, I'll pass it on to Sarah.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Sarah Naw. I am a Seattle Public School parent. I have a middle schooler and an elementary school kiddo. And I am going to talk a little bit more specifically about how to be an effective advocate with regards to the $1 Billion Bake Sale. But there are some good talking points in here too, if there are other causes that you're passionate about, to keep bugging your legislators and holding them accountable. So this picture is actually from 2017 when former Governor Jay Inslee signed a bill to quote unquote fully fund public education. I think we all know how that has gone because we're back again at the Capitol to ask our legislators, to actually fully fund public education. But this was at the bill signing. You can see a bunch of kids and educators and other folks who helped make that happen. It was a big deal back in 2017, and we're hoping in 2025 we'll be able to do the same thing with Governor Ferguson. So before you meet with your legislators next week, hopefully, it's wise to do a little bit of learning about who they are and sort of what stances they take. You can find all sorts of information about who they are, what committee assignments they're assigned to on leg.wa.gov. I recommend folks peeking around that website. They actually just redid it in the last couple of months. It's so much easier to navigate. You can just type in their name and their pages will pop up. One thing to take a look at now is to see what bills some of your legislators have sponsored, especially if they are sponsoring or co-sponsoring any sort of education-related bills, especially if they are specific to funding. It might be worth knowing ahead of time, because then when you meet with them, you can say, hey, thank you so much for sponsoring or co-sponsoring that legislation. The other thing to do ahead of time is you're going to want to think through what you actually are going to say with your legislator, who you are, what your issue is and why you care about it, and then what you want your legislator to do. And as Megan mentioned earlier, telling a story about how you personally are impacted by the current state of affairs and what could happen if they advance fully funding public education goes a long way. The other thing I will say is schedules can be tough, as Alex has sort of alluded to. So be ready to meet with a legislative assistant or a legislative aide instead of the legislator, because schedules do change. It is not I don't want folks to feel disappointed if they're meeting with an aide instead of your legislator. Their job is to do this and then to take that information back to the legislator. So it's just as important to meet with someone from your district in the legislature if you aren't able to actually get in face-to-face with your representative or your senator. So what you're going to do when you have your meeting is you are going to deliver your message, and then you're going to listen to what your legislator has to say. So I know it can feel a little intimidating to go down and talk to folks who have been in these elected offices, but that is literally their job. They want to hear from you. They want to hear from your kiddos. They want to hear from educators because they know that we are champions for fully funded public education. Personal stories go a long way. So thinking about how the lack of fully funded public education has impacted you or your kiddo or your community is going to land, especially when combined with data for what we know about how this is impacting communities. You're also going to want to ask questions. So you are your strongest advocate when you understand how much your legislator actually knows about your issue. So don't be afraid to ask if they understand a little bit about why we're asking for education to be fully funded, especially if somebody's like, well, 10 years ago, or not 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we did this. Why isn't education fully funded? And hopefully after tonight, you'll have some answers for those questions for your legislators. And then listen to their questions. And if you don't know the answer, it's perfectly reasonable and expected to say, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to follow up with you. The $1 billion bake sale is able to help you with that follow-up if you need it. But it's important to take their questions as well and make sure that you're answering them to the best of your ability. And if you can't in the moment, make sure that you have another through line to connect with them after that meeting on the 30th. So you've heard Megan and I both mention your personal why or your story about how this issue impacts you and why it's important. So what's most important and what we'll do a little bit tonight if we have some time is to think about what your why is. Connecting the ask to a story that is personal really humanizes statistics. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of big numbers, but drilling that down into something that has personally impacted you or your community is sort of what makes those statistics and facts come alive. So why are you going down to Olympia on the 30th? Why are you funding for more funding in school? Why are you making this ask of your legislators? Are all good questions that you can have, personally with your partners, with your neighbors, with folks in your school community, with your kiddos, if you're considering bringing them down. It can be anything from, I'm a teacher and we need more funding in school because the needs of our students are what they are, and it is helpful. What does it look like for students if special education services aren't fully funded? What does it look like for families if adequate transportation isn't provided? What does it look like for staff if the costs of materials aren't fully covered? As I said, effective advocacy is a combination of data and emotions, and that's how we as constituents are able to actually hold people in power accountable and actually impart change, which is the whole point of us going down there and asking this of them. So one thing you're going to do is you're going to want to ask for a commitment. So as I've heard a legislator tell a group before, don't just ask for my support. Ask, in theory, I can support anything until I'm blue in the face. If you want my vote, ask for my vote. So there are a couple of bills that we'll talk a little bit about in this conversation, in this presentation, that we can look at specifically. But because we don't have specific bills that we are championing, we can say, I want you to vote to fully fund public education, or I want you to fully vote, to vote to fully, to improve how much funding education is receiving out of the general operating budget. If your legislator is supportive, be sure to thank them. It goes a long way. As I mentioned earlier, when you're doing a little bit of reconnaissance on your legislator, if they are sponsoring a bill that is hoping to move the needle on some of that funding, thank them. So for example, I am in the 46th district here in Seattle. Representative Paulette has been a longstanding advocate for special education and special education funding. And he is a primary sponsor on a bill to remove the special education funding cap. So if I meet with him, that is definitely something that I'm going to thank him for. If your legislator is undecided, it's always great to offer to send more information afterwards. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the $1 billion bake sale can help direct you in how to send that follow-up information after the 30th. So if we're getting into the nitty-gritty, and as Megan has said, and Alex has said as well, all of this information will be provided to you when you come to the Advocacy Day on the 30th. So these will be in your registration, quote unquote, packet when you come and check into the church. If you aren't able to do that before the rally, there will be some available afterwards if you can scoot to the church before your legislator meeting. We can also potentially send these out electronically as well, so you have them. So our main issue, every kid in Washington deserves excellent and equitable public education opportunities. So very high level, these are some of those statistics that we've talked about, that data. Our state has the 3rd highest GDP per capita in the US, but spends the 2nd lowest percentage of that GDP on public education. And for folks who need a little refresher, the GDP per capita is essentially the amount of money Washington produces in a year divided by the number of people in Washington. As a result, our state currently underfunds public education by about $4 billion annually, which is not an insignificant chunk of change, but it is our state's paramount duty to fill that gap. Part of the reason why that number is as big as it is right now is because of the rising costs of running schools. So materials, supplies, insurance, special education services, gas, transportation, all of those things are increasing in cost and are straining local budgets because the state isn't allocating enough money to individual districts. So our vision is when you are talking with your legislator, we want to say to them, it's imperative that our state invests in an education system that fairly compensates our educators and serves the diverse needs of all students. As a result, schools should have sufficient funding to make sure that we have proven drivers of student academic outcomes, such as small class sizes, diverse learning environments, social emotional learning opportunities, the supports around social and mental health, including counselors, nurses, and social workers, focusing on the whole child curriculum, so making sure that music, art, language, and STEM are a part of standard curriculum and not just available for a handful of students. And last but certainly not least, reliable transportation to and from school and access to nutritious food. So our ask, and this is what we're going to say to our legislators after we have said, this is the problem. Our solution is that the legislator must fully and amply fund public schools to ensure a critical foundation of a just democratic society. And this is our key opportunity for this session. 2025 is a budget year. So Washington State, just for those who need a little background, decides their budget biannually, so every other year. So right now, the legislature meets for an extended period of time to determine how they're going to allocate what money they have for the next 2 years. Next year, you can move money around a little bit, but it's certainly not going to be a $4 billion adjustment. So that is why right now and this moment is a really key pivotal moment to ensure that our public schools are fully funded. The specific asks are to ask that they take immediate action to prevent devastating school district cuts for this immediate next school year. So for 25 to 2026. to secure at least $4 billion per year of stable and long-term funding for K through 12 public schools, and then committing to make sure that Washington State is a leader in public education. So I know earlier I said sometimes it can be helpful to see if your legislators are in support of some of the opportunities that may be tied to school funding. And below are a handful of bills that have been already filed this year that are specific to education funding. You can click on, you can look up those bills on that same website, the leg.wa.gov, to see where they are. And once you click on them, I don't know if this will work in real time. I'm not going to try it at the moment. But what will happen is it'll pop up the bill, and then underneath it'll list the last names of either the senators, if it's a Senate bill, and that's where it says SB, that's a Senate bill. If it says HB, that's House bill, because we have a Senate and the House of Representatives, two governing bodies of our state's Congress. And so it will show the last names of those senators or representatives as a sponsor, which is the first spot, and then co-sponsors sort of in order beyond that. So if you look here, we have some great bills that have already been introduced around student transportation, concerning material supplies and operating costs, and then special education funding. Two things, quick things of note. Senate Bill 5307 and House Bill 1310 are what's known as companion bills. And those were by request from OSPI. So the Office of the Superintendent actually went to Congress and said, we'd really like you to put forth a bill to address special education. Companion bills, if we think back to our civics lessons of yore, oftentimes bills will be proposed in both sides of Congress, because what happens is if it passes in one side, then it has to go to the other side and pass the other side. So if it's passed in the Senate, then it goes to the House, and then it has to pass the House, and vice versa. So sometimes what will happen is groups will propose bills in both chambers in the hopes that one of them will get through, because then it'll come back around to the other side of Congress. The three Senate bills with the double asterisks, all three of those actually were heard in a public hearing earlier today in the Senate. Overwhelmingly positive. We had thousands of folks sign in pro for those bills across the state, which is great. And as a result, those three bills have already been scheduled for an executive session the morning that we will be there. That schedule is subject to change, so it might not happen. Unfortunately, executive sessions are closed to the public, so we can't go fill the galley and watch them debate whether or not those bills should move forward. But that is a really great sign that three of those bills have moved out of the early learning in K through 12 committee and are being discussed in the executive session. So wanted to get really specific in the last few minutes before we potentially break into smaller groups and practice amongst ourselves for actually talking with your legislator. So these are pretty basic. Megan, I don't know if you want to go through these with me or if we just want to look at them a little bit. But essentially the four main components are, you're going to want to introduce yourself. If there are just a few of you meeting with your legislator, everybody can be introduced. If you're in one of those larger groups where we're going to have 15, 20 people potentially meeting with a legislator, you're likely not going to have time to do individual introductions, because chances are you're going to just have 15 to 20 minutes at most. So considering a generic introduction or designating one or two spokespeople to speak on behalf of the group is a good idea to save yourself on time. You're going to want to name the issue specifically. We're here to talk about fully funding public education. This is a critical issue in our community because, and speak specifically about your community. The needs in Seattle are different than the needs in Yakima and are different than the needs in Vancouver and on and on and on. They represent you and your constituency. So make sure that you speak specifically to what issues you're seeing in their legislative district. Again, share your personal story. Fully funding public schools is important to me because. And then lastly, make your ask. Can we count on you to vote yes to fully fund public schools? It's nice to be able to pose them a direct question that they can respond to specifically, as opposed to just sort of saying, hey, it would be nice if you could do that. Thank you. Have them make a commitment if possible. If they agree and say yes, awesome. Thank them for their commitment. And if you feel like the conversation is going well, you might even consider asking if they would champion funding education among their colleagues. So helping them whip up support amongst other representatives or senators. If they're on the fence and they can't really give you a commitment, don't be afraid to ask them what extra information they will need in order to change their mind to vote yes. If they say no, and that's okay, reiterate why this is such a specific and critical issue for you as their constituents, and ask if there's anything that you could share or bring back to them, information, data, what have you, that would change their mind from a no to a yes. And then lastly, send a follow-up email in about a week. Just send a quick note to say, hey, thank you so much for meeting with us. It was really wonderful. If they had any outstanding questions that you weren't able to answer in the moment, that's a great time to answer those questions if you have them. And then you can always resend an electronic version of our one-pager, which you will have in hand on the 30th, as one more touch point of all the reasons why they should vote yes on fully funding public education. So I'm going to take a pause. I haven't been looking at the chat at all. So
I'll point you to some questions, Sarah. How about this? AJ asks, if they vote to fund it, does it get funded, or does it depend on how much revenue is coming in? Like, for example, we're telling them to add $4 billion to education. So does that depend on whether a wealth tax passes or other revenue related bills?
Yes, it does depend on how the budget, so appropriations and or the Ways and Means Committee on either side of the House decides to allocate funding. So most of these bills will come with what's known as a fiscal note. So it'll say, in order for us to fully lift the special education funding cap, it's going to cost us X amount of dollars. So they will know, in theory, how much money a certain bill or a certain component will cost. It's up to them to think through, once it passes into Ways and Means or appropriations, to say, we actually have the money to do that if we move some stuff around, or we actually have some reserves that we can pull from, and it doesn't mean that we have to slice off revenue from other programming. I will say, the revenue forecast for the state is not great. Governor Ferguson has come out and said that he wants an austerity budget, which basically means he wants everybody to do as much as they can with the least amount of money possible. It's not, it's an uphill battle, but it's not an unwinnable uphill battle. We are an incredibly wealthy state. And I think the time is now to put pressure on our state's Congress to invest in its kids and its communities. And I think there's a really compelling argument to be made for that. And I think continuing to say, we want Washington to be a leader, and we want Washington to support all kids in having access to a quality public education. It's hard for people to say no to that. Whether that means a wealth tax gets proposed and pushed through, not sure. Especially since our focus is not necessarily asking for a wealth tax. It's saying you need to fund public education, and we'll leave it up to you to figure out how you'd like to fund it. If you personally want to ask your legislator for a wealth tax, yes, great. And I think it's important to note that we need to put pressure on the governor as well, that this should be a priority to ensure that the funding is where it needs to be. Because ultimately what happens is if the state Congress passes things, the governor always has the right to veto, and we don't want it to go there.
And just quickly on what I've heard about wealth tax or any sort of some of the discussions about potential revenue solutions, there are some concerns that they could be tied up in court. So I think our ask is still kind of high level and broad. It is fund education in the short term and sustainably long term. So you can sort of read between the lines, but putting eggs in like wealth tax basket may not necessarily solve the short term challenges that so many districts are currently facing. Okay, sorry, Sarah, I was going back to the chat. Okay, there's some good comments in here on information that you can probably bring to your meeting, like statistics of the big three funding. So those are the bills that are up there on the special ed, material supplies, operations, and I always forget to see
Costs, operating costs,
operating
material
costs,
supplies and operating costs. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
transportation. So we've seen a lot of those graphs that districts have kind of put together.
Yeah, and I really love Ben from Olympia posted in the chat just now that it's not our job to sort out how they fulfill their constitutional duty to fully fund public education. That's what they're supposed to do. And they also, there's a both and with that too. I really love that messaging. And yeah, we will be leaving behind a one pager. We have our legislative priorities. But to Ben's point, you know, they listen to us to inform how they make these decisions. And this is their job to do this, and they have staff to help them do this. However, so however you want to approach this meeting on Thursday is going to be absolutely okay. If you want to just show up and say, fund schools, please, it's so important, that's great. If you want to do some research to see what committees your legislator sits on, and you want to ask them some of the more of the nitty gritty, and you want to find out more information, like people were posting in the chat on issues specific to your district, that's also very helpful. Knowledge is power. The more we can share the wealth in that knowledge, I think the more helpful that is. But also just showing up is extremely important. So don't put pressure on yourself if you are feeling like you have to be an expert on this, because you really do not. Just a personal story is extremely powerful. So yeah, I think
Can I add to that a little bit?
Yep.
One of the reasons that a personal story is also really useful is that your legislator can use that personal story to convince their colleagues to vote for something that they believe in. So a lot of us, especially in Seattle, are going to be meeting with legislators who do care, who want to push things through, who are maybe co-sponsoring some of these bills, or maybe the wealth tax, and they could really use additional stories again to try and spread the word to their colleagues and convince them. So it's also arming them with stories, in addition to maybe convincing some other legislators to vote.
Yeah, Jessica, go for it.
Yeah, just kind of a technical question. Can we ask them to co-sponsor one of those bills, or do they just go straight from sponsoring to voting?
Sarah, do you want to answer that?
So now that I'm not sure if there's a cutoff. There might be somebody on the call who can answer this. Most of the bills as they've been proposed, as they've been filed, the main sponsor and the sponsor are there, but you may look and see that like one of those bills has like 18 different co-sponsors. Like people will sign on in support, which is great. You can certainly ask if there's additional legislation, if they would consider co-sponsoring or signing on in support. One thing to think about is if they are in the either of the education committees, either in the House or the Senate, because not everybody will be, not everybody's on every committee. So if your legislator is on one of those committees, asking them, that can be a really specific ask because they will have to vote on that specific bill initially to keep it moving along. Also, if they are on the Ways and Means Committee or the Appropriations. So Appropriations is sort of like the money committee in the House, and Ways and Means is the money committee in the Senate. Those are also great talking points to say, hey, I know you're on the Ways and Means Committee. We'd really like you to do what you can to ensure that when these bills come to your committee to be moved forward, that you're able to find the resources to make it happen.
Yeah, I know that's another way to get a commitment, that's be proactive and shorter term than a vote.
Yes.
So it's important.
Yeah. And ultimately all we're asking is for them to move things forward, right? Like, it's still early on in the session. So nothing's been moved far enough along where we're going to be asking, where we have a specific ask. So specifically if they're in those committees, the Education Committee or the budget committees, asking for their votes to move things forward can be really powerful. And if they're not, then simply say, hopefully this will come up for a full vote of your chamber. And when it does, we'd like you to vote yes.
So another side note is that we, if in terms of meetings with your legislators, we really, it's really important that if to go to a meeting with the legislative district that you live in, where you pay property taxes and where you live. So if you want to attend another meeting with a different legislative district, we would love it if you could check with our campaign, because we need to make sure that there is at least one constituent from that district in that meeting. It's legislators really do not like it if they're not meeting with people that live in their district. So but I love to, it's also great to have some support. So if you're feeling like you're not going to be supported during your legislative meeting and you want one of us from the campaign to be there with you, please let us know and we'll do our best to see if we can make that happen. Yeah, are there any other questions about this for Thursday? I think what I would like to do, we're coming up on our hour time, and so we were going to try to do some breakout groups so that we could practice telling our personal story. I think we're going to skip that, but I would love it if there is one or two volunteers who would like to share a personal story about, like, as if you would be sharing with your legislator, of why it's so important for you personally to have our legislators fully fund public education. Maybe someone who's done this before, or yeah. Is it Christiana?
Yeah, it is. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm in the 5th Legislative District. I'm in Black Diamond. Sorry, I just have wet hair now. But what I would be telling my legislators is talking about how I live in the Enumclaw School District, and we are never able to pass a bond to save our lives. Even if we were able to move the 60% supermajority to a regular majority, we'd still have a really hard time being able to rebuild our schools. And we have schools here that are molding, that are leaking, and children have gone into this school with buckets all over. Parents will come visit and say, those are the same buckets that I had when I was in school. So for that end, I think about how many shortcomings we have when we're living in parts of the state where we know that it's going to be nearly impossible to fund even the most basic needs, to say nothing of the fact also that my spouse is a public education teacher as well. He'll work 10-hour days, and often it's because he's doing all of the basic triage that a lot of other educators are having to do and step up on, which means it's very hard to really have any sort of time at the end of the day, because you are doing that mental health, you're doing the regular instruction, you're doing all these components because you're constantly doing more with less. So we can't just keep doing piecemeals on, you know, the buildings themselves and on the funding and the programs themselves when we know that the system isn't working. And what you pay for it one way or another. So if you're not paying for schools now, you're going to pay for something down the line, and it'll be far more adverse, far more literally taxing for all of us, to say nothing of just financially, but emotionally as well. So that's more or less what I'd be saying, but there you go.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, the Washington State PTA legislative consultant likes to say that we spend money to educate, incarcerate, or medicate. And so if we can do some preventative spending, so we can avoid having to incarcerate and pay for medical supplies for people that need it. So anyway, this is a helpful thing. It's like, go education. Would somebody else, thank you so much, Cristiano, that was wonderful. Is there somebody else that would like to share, to give us an example and share your personal why? Ooh, Ben just dropped some fire in the chat. Mark Twain said, every time you stop a school, you will have to build a jail. What you gain at one end, you lose at the other. Fire. Thanks for sharing that. I'm like going to bring that to my legislators on Thursday. It's very great. Somebody else want to share personal story? Get brave, people. We want to hear your voice. Go for it, Burdell. Thank you. Oh, you are on mute.
Hi,
Yeah.
I am there. Hi, I'm Sarah. I am coming from Seattle, but I work over in the Bellevue School District. And currently, the Bellevue School District, along with some other schools on the east side, are currently cutting their budgets for this school year by, Bellevue is cutting it by $10 million. Next year, they're slated to cut another 16 million. So if they can only find 5 million this year, they've got 21 million to cut next year. I work in the only Title I school over in Bellevue, and I know some of the problems that we're seeing at that school mirror some of the schools that I have friends and family working and going to school in over in Seattle, where low literacy is a huge problem, along with low math scores. And the children, I do mental health, I provide mental health in the schools, and I can see a correlation to the children that are suffering from low literacy and low math scores and their mental health. Because if they feel that they can't figure this out now when they're in middle school or in high school, they don't have a chance when they get out of school. And cutting what is on the table right now are the Title I's, are the special educations, are the pull-out classes where kids are getting smaller classes, like 6 to 7 students, to learn the sounds of letters that they missed when they were in COVID and going on online school. And right now, pulling back from that is going to be a real big problem. Hi, Erin. So yeah, that's my why.
That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Yeah. Is there anybody else? You know, I guess I'll end by saying, you know, when my daughter I'm a mental health professional as well. When my daughter started at in kindergarten at our local public school, I was like shocked and horrified and astonished that our PTA funded our school counselor for like, I think it was like 50% of her salary. And I was like, what is this? We only have allocated a part-time counselor. Like what year is it? how are we not supporting children's mental well-being in a different space, but the parents are having to fund this through PTA funds? What kind of equity, what is going on here? So I started getting curious about advocacy stuff. And last year when I went down to Olympia for the PTA Advocacy Day and I met with my legislators, my representative, Emily Alvarado, she said, you know, this is great, but in Seattle, we'll support anything for education, but we really need a statewide coalition. You guys need to really get people from all across the state. And so I started working to help collaborate to figure this out. So thank you to everybody who's showing up. And I think it's going to take all of us to do this work, and to keep educating ourselves, each other. We're all in this together. We belong to each other. Our kids deserve this. And I know it's not easy even just to be on this Zoom call or to be listening to this Zoom call. So thank you all for your time. And this is so important. I think Thursday is going to be a really great event. All the local bake sales we've already hosted throughout this campaign have been really awesome, just to educate more people about what's going on with school funding. So with that being said, we will say goodbye and see you all on Thursday. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. The $1 Billion Bake Sale, wa@gmail.com. But Alex will be in touch. If you know Alex, give her a coffee or a high five. She's been crushing it. So thank you everybody for your support. Go team. Have a good night, guys.